and in his name the Gentiles will hope. As far as the reading of God's holy word, let's pray together. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your spirit. Thank you, God, that you've given us, Lord, your revelation, that we can hold it in our hands ourselves. And we get to pour over, Father, all of your promises, Lord, that you promised to your people about Mashiach, about the Messiah. Thank you, Lord, that you chose to put us into your story, Lord, after the time of Christ, and we get to look back at all of your providence, the beauty, Lord, of your sovereignty. And you are weaving together history for your glory. Thank you, Lord, that we have an ultimate standard to point to stand on.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Gods and Glass Tubes. Once again, I find myself standing here in front of this clinic, Arizona Reproductive Medicine Specialists. I find myself standing here because once again this week, nobody from any church protested this facility. And yet, they did go out to the new location of Planned Parenthood in Tempe, Arizona, and they went out there and they protested. They found a little surprise waiting for them, that when they went to protest this week, they had to protest without any amplified sound. And yet they stood out there continuing to yell, to denigrate, and to humiliate everybody in their view.
The image of God in its most innocent and defenseless form.
True to form, Zachary Conover arrived to protest Planned Parenthood. Zachary had a rude awakening when he arrived. Zachary now has to preach with zero amplification. After Tempe police started handing out written warnings for disorderly conduct, trespassing, and aggressive panhandling, Zachary's reply was to whine about how persecuted Christians are because they don't get to exercise their First Amendment rights. Zachary fails to realize that freedom of speech doesn't cover decibel levels, and that his amplifier violated those ordinances, as did the amplifiers of the other evangelicals. The result was Zachary beginning his live Facebook feed with something less of an evangelical preach and more of a whine fest. In the midst of Zachary's whining session, he uttered a blatant lie by stating that the officers attempted to inform him he couldn't stand on the sidewalk. Every officer that arrived informed Zachary he was welcome to stand on the sidewalk. They were issued written trespass warnings for parking at a business next door, filling the parking lot with the evangelicals' vehicles and refusing to move them. They were issued warnings for aggressive panhandling when an officer watched one of the protesters, a woman with an orange vest and an orange hat on, walk into the middle of the drive, put her hand up to stop an exiting vehicle, and refused to allow the vehicle to exit until the driver of the vehicle accepted their literature. Even after a written warning, that protester continues the practice of actively stopping traffic. Such is the attitude of the evangelicals. Everything they do is right, even if it interrupts the lives of unwitting victims, and everything everyone else does is wrong, no matter how many people's lives are augmented by it. In the mind of the evangelicals, legal abortion bestows upon them the sovereignty to disobey every other law in place.
Where you can stand. Because trust me, if you can't stand there, someone will be called on you to tell you that you can't. We've already had that happen on Wednesday. Officers who tried to tell us that we couldn't stand on this public sidewalk. Officers who said that we were committing disorderly conduct by disturbing the peace and criminally trespassing. And my favorite one personally, aggressively panhandling as we're passing out literature to cars that are leaving. So essentially what they're saying is that we would be penalized for what a person begging for money would be.
Now in this episode, we're going to be looking at one of the church's big arguments that they like to tout while standing there in front of Planned Parenthood. The argument that they like to tout as their big strong point is consistency. We're going to look at that consistency today, just as we've looked at that consistency in the past with their desire to protest in front of Planned Parenthoods and yet not come out here. But in this case, we're going to go a little bit wider scope. Today, we're going to be looking at the consistency of yet a larger institute. We're going to be looking at the consistency of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, one of the biggest participants in the protests in front of Planned Parenthood has been members of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the Roman Catholic Church has always held a pretty staunch public view about life. They've consistently held the staunch view publicly that life begins at conception. And yet, while they continue to carry on in front of Planned Parenthood, praying for the supposed lives that they want to save, and the supposed lives that they would preach are being terminated at Planned Parenthood, when they went into a court of law in Colorado and defended themselves against a malpractice suit in which a woman and her twin sons died in the care of a Roman Catholic-owned hospital, the defense was a totally different defense. In that defense, they argued that the fetuses that she was carrying did not have personhood. The reason that they argued that those fetuses did not have personhood was the very same argument on the other side of their Planned Parenthood argument. In the cases of the fetuses that the woman was carrying when she died, and those fetuses died as well, did not have personhood. They did not have personhood because they were not born alive.
Lori Stodgehill was 28 weeks pregnant when she went to the emergency room of St. Thomas More Hospital in Canyon City, Colorado. Lori was suffering symptoms of vomiting and shortness of breath. The hospital failed to properly treat Lori, and Lori would later die. Lori's unborn twins would die along with her. Jeremy Stodgehill sued the hospital for wrongful death of 3 lives. In that suit, Centura Healthcare, a healthcare entity owned in a co-op by the Roman Catholic Church and the Adventist Church, defended their position that unborn fetuses did not have personhood as applicable by Colorado state law. Centura successfully countersued Jeremy Stodgehill and garnished his wages to the tune of $18,000. In a public statement later on, Centura would express regret for having used the defense. Centura never offered to return the money garnished Jeremy Stodgehill.
So who gets to determine what is life? Who gets to determine where life starts and how life starts? How life starts to become significant here. It begins to become significant because the Roman Catholic Church is staunchly opposed to the termination of a life that began as a sex act. And yet, as I stand out here in front of this clinic, that has never, not once, ever been protested. The Church is not so staunch to defend the lives that begin in the process of IVF.
This divide between the denominations creates a divide in the political issue of abortion, IVF, and the liability of medical providers. In order to establish the sanctity of personhood for embryos relative to abortion, there exists the task of creating personhood for embryos at in vitro fertilization clinics. There also exists the task of creating the personhood of embryos in hospitals operated by church-owned healthcare systems. This is where the refusal comes into play. So the abolitionists have decided to settle with the strategy of creating an atmosphere where abortion is given a negative connotation. The result is the same tactic used by high school bullies throughout history. This strategy of settling for attempting to humiliate the patients entering Planned Parenthood has created a cottage industry of abortion mill ministry. On a daily basis, preachers start new ministries and make their move to cash in on the growing industry of denigrating Planned Parenthood and other family planning clinics. As they cash in on that growing industry, the abolitionists fail to see that they are actually becoming more dependent on abortion than Planned Parenthood is. Some ministries take in more money for standing in front of clinics and denigrating patients than Planned Parenthood takes in for treating them. Apologia Church has taken the denigrations to a new level. Jeff Durbin has taken the approach of denigrations to include racial slurs and denigrations to those of the Jewish faith as well as those of other faiths.
So the person that says it's not a person, it's a nigger. You see, in this case, the baby in the womb is your Jew. The baby in the womb is your nigger.
Now, is the church creating a dividing line? Does the church have something to fear in protesting in vitro fertilization? Does the church have something to fear in actively taking a stance to end in vitro fertilization in just as much as they want to end abortion. What we have to bear in mind is that yes, there are some practicing Christians who get abortions. There are far more practicing Christians who go to in vitro fertilization clinics, and there are far more Christians who are the parents of in vitro fertilized children. So this begs the question, who is creating the great dividing line? It would appear that the greatest dividing line is being created by the church itself. One of the more active groups and one of the more passionate groups in their endeavor to end abortion, abolish human abortion, was castigated by one of the other large groups who are known to organize anti-abortion effects. Babies Are Murdered Here. Babies Are Murdered Here is a group that is steeply tied here in Tempe, Arizona. In Tempe, Arizona, Marcus Pittman is one of the executive producers of the documentary Babies Are Murdered Here. And yet, the two of them have steadfastly refused to work together. The reason they work together is because while Abolish Human Abortion Now is focused on ending abortion, Abolish Human Abortion is also intently focused on protesting churches. You see, while it's all fine and good for them to carry graphic signs in front of a Planned Parenthood and protest and yell at the patients that are going into those clinics, once they stand in front of churches with the very same signs, it's a whole different story. They started standing in front of the churches with the different signs, and public statements were made denouncing their efforts for everything that they were doing. It's messages like these that draw these dividing lines and make the effort of abolitionists go absolutely nowhere. In fact, in recent months, it appears to have been retracting. It appears to be retracting because of infighting, because of disagreements, and because of disavowalments of these people who, in spite of the fact that they want to form an entire society based on Christian rule, they can't even come together long enough to form a decent team. I close this episode with a special message to people like Jeff Durbin, Marcus Pittman, Zachary Conover, Stephen Brown, and the many others who want to stand in front of Planned Parenthood and yell and scream at the protesters and yell and scream at everybody else who is on site. You stay there. You keep yelling at those people. You keep trying to force your voice. You keep trying to force your opinion on the women at Planned Parenthood. Meanwhile, I will stand here. I will continue to defend my stance that no unborn embryo deserves personhood. And as long as you keep doing the work that you keep doing, and you keep doing it in the manner that you keep doing it, I will win. I will see to it that for the rest of time, unborn embryos don't get personhood. So, you keep praying for me, and I'll keep thinking for you. Thanks for watching Gods in Glass Tubes.